Democracy is a political system which permits power to be concentrated and regulated without the use of an army. We the people are encouraged to give up our rights and power and eventually, property, by means of a ballot system. The alternative to democracy is tyranny. Or so we are told. Democracy has come to mean representative democracy, as democracy, now called direct democracy, is little more than a tyranny of the majority. With representative democracy, the votes of many thousands of people are collected in the body of a single person. Democracy is a demonic ritual of many becoming one. Direct democracy gives every stakeholder a vote on every issue. This is an inefficient method of government. Not everyone has a stake in every issue or the means to make an informed choice. It is not possible to make us all equally informed, nor will we all ever be equally affected by the outcome of every policy. Few issues can be simplified sufficiently that a vote on a question would do justice to the complexities of the matter. We can vote whether or not to permit capital punishment, but a yes or no to the question does not do the issue justice. We are not all equally able to condense our position on any matter into a pithy speech or voice our concerns in an allotted space of time. Those who are able to mount a concise propaganda war have the advantage over those who are long-winded and more nuanced. In other words, universal balloting does not mean the outcome will represent the mythical will of the people. Indeed, in a direct democracy there is the danger that the eloquent and charismatic will win out over the educated voice. But even when we engage in representative democracy and permit a few skilled orators to explain the issues, democracy fails in a substantial way. The popularity of a person provides no indication of his or her degree of honesty or competence. But there is more wrong with democracy than its pandering to the mob. Moving beyond the political problem, we arrive at the structure of the electorate. It follows we hold elections because people have differences of opinion. Those who run for office are expected to represent those who vote for them as well as those who did not. But this is not possible except in a general sense, as most of us realize. Those who do not want gun control and those who do, cannot both be expected to be represented, at least in this matter, regardless of who is voted in. People on opposite sides of the aisle cannot both be equally represented, and if they could, voting would be irrelevant. We vote when we think we will be better off with one person in office than another. If all constituents' concerns could be equally represented, what of those who want Sharia law to be the law of the land? One representative cannot equally represent two equally official languages. One cannot speak two languages at once, and switching randomly back and forth is an option pleasing to no one, especially those who are unilingual. In other words, diversity makes no one happy. The more diverse a nation is, the less represented we are. A conservative is not represented by a liberal, and black people vehemently deny they are represented by white politicians. If no group represents more than 20% of the population, then anyone who gains office will represent only a small fraction of the total persons in his or her area. Natives, blacks, Muslims, Indians and others all agree they need self-government because the law of the land is the white man's law. Diverse groups claim racial discrimination is systemic. This is tantamount to a claim that democracy does not produce someone who represents them. Minorities clamor to see more of those who look like them in office, top jobs, and in positions of influence. None of these voices like diversity. They do not like to see it or be influenced by it. There are claims made that juries made up predominantly of whites will not judicate fairly. If this is true, it is not likely minorities want a government made up of white men enacting laws. But then must whites step aside in every case and give their seat to some other group? There have been many studies done on why it is difficult to establish a democracy. It took France 165 years, from the French Revolution to the advent of de Gaulle, to accept the electoral process as the way to change governments. Perhaps it is a realization of the historic fragility of democracy that caused Democrats to react adversely to the January 6th event. A minor disturbance in the eyes of most, January 6th was viewed as an attack on the democratic institution of the United States by Democrats. Had Antifa been involved, one supposes the response of the parties would have been reversed. Regardless, the panic of January 6th stands in odd contrast to the BLM riots. But this is a case in point. Regardless of the event, every issue is seen differently by diverse groups. If there are thousands of religions, dozens of political philosophies and many economic theories, what happens when one adds dozens of races, nationalities, cultures, genders, and agendas to the mix? If elections only see a percentage of the people vote and the vote is always split between several political factions, only one of which wins enough seats to form a government, how representative is the outcome? How long before groups refuse to abide by the outcome of an election, seeing the result as unrepresentative of who they are? Governments can contrive an artificial representation, in the form of a caucus. But one has to assume this manufactured diversity comes at the sacrifice of the most qualified. But what does it mean to live in a nation with a government that represents all minorities? What happens to the majority? If the majority feels it lacks representation or that the representation is not representative, what form will the backlash take? The left naturally discounts these concerns because it does not represent the majority. To consider the majority smacks of racism because the majority is naturally of a particular race. When the majority asks to be represented is to engage in hate speech. The left believes whites have had the stage for too long. We are not represented in Asia, Africa, Latin America, or any native community. Why is it time to step down and let others have their moment of fame in North America and Europe? If white people are inherently racist and intolerant and have designed their culture to systematically discriminate against non-whites, are they expected to voluntarily stand down? Diversity does not help any community. There is no culture that can survive diversity. Democracy is designed to bury the problems created by diversity in an overcoat of manufactured consensus. Diversity is another word for divide and conquer. Many countries fail because they lack a homogeneous population and sufficient norms to overcome the negative impacts of the differences. But it is always easier to operate a community that is homogeneous. This is why faith is so important, as it covers over the superficial with works done in faith. Community comes from normalcy. Community is the product of normalization. Diversity is the polar opposite of what is normal. In fact, it is a rejection of normalcy as a concept. Diversity is the idea that nothing is normal, and everything is as justified as anything else. But this is belied by one simple and incontrovertible fact. Diversity is criminal and evil and demonic and cannot be justified by anything less than crimes against humanity. But for this to be true, there has to be an objective norm. This is the state of rest in which all elements are in their proper place. We can determine this by determining whether or not there is a need for illicit transfers of value. In a state of rest, which is not the same as a state of entropy, all units will exhibit zero entropy or be in a perfected state. This is not physical perfection but social perfection. All entities will express social normalcy. In the language of economics, inflows equal outflows. This is true for the individual as well as the community. In common terms, I will earn sufficient to pay for my expenses. This is all that normalcy means. It is when we insert a virus into the mix that issues arise. Imagine if everyone in a community scrupulously paid for every benefit they obtained. It is difficult to imagine, but so far as how the community functioned, it would be akin to tribal times where everyone basically created what he needed, and when he had surplus, he would share it with the expectation that those who had a surplus would share with him. Only those who by accident or age fell on hard times would be subsidized. But as we know, it is a fool who relies on others to do the right thing. A tribal grouping is simple and small enough to keep everyone honest, but in a complex economy the temptation always exists to take a shortcut. This pressure to take a gamble on getting away with freeloading is only made worse by diversity. This is why diversity harms community. It only adds more reasons and avenues for freeloading because it removes the social norms the society used to operate on. We need to reassert and reestablish our social norms.